The hidden history about the Nubian pyramids. Imagine a society where the Egyptians could have not been the most advanced civilization that we know for thousands of years, an ethnic group that actually rivaled their technology and power. It's hard to imagine that. Additionally, this ethnic group even had more plentiful resources such as gold and powerful pharaohs, which we typically normally associate to the Egyptians. Today, we are talking about the forgotten lands in Sudan, the kingdom of Kush, and the Nubian pyramids that are depicted in this picture. Why do very few people know about them, even though they rivaled the powers of the Egyptians? And even though they had more than 200 Nubian pyramids in their society? Well, it comes down to their history, so let's briefly talk about that. The timeline of the Kingdom of Kush. Around 2500 BCE to 1500 BCE, the Kushites were the first settlers in North Sudan that was home to the oldest sub-Saharan African kingdom. These powerful kings built a strikingly powerful force like the Egyptians, including their superior skills in archery, which they often used to invade Egypt in the north. The Kushites appeared to have maintained independence, although regularly engaging with the ancient Egyptian civilization during this time. However, there were ongoing wars back and forth in the Sudan territory and the Egyptians. Sudan was coveted for its rich natural resources that has been previously mentioned, gold, and also additionally ivory. This made the ancient Egyptians attracted to seek out and conquer this type of area, especially during the Old Kingdom when they first were discovered. This often led the Egyptian and the Kushites rulers sought to control this type of resources in the area. Egypt finally withdrew in the 11th century BCE, and the kings in the Sudan area grew powerful. They invaded Egypt and ruled as pharaohs in the south to gain more land and to show them that they are as equivalent as the Egyptians. Kush was the most powerful state in the Nile Valley because of this around 1700 BCE. Conflict, even though there's still ongoing conflict, these battles ended after, unfortunately, the conquest of Kush by conquest of Thutmose I during the New Kingdom around 1550 BCE. To directly control this territory. Now that we have a general overview of how the Kingdom of Kush is somewhat less popular, and a few people around the world know about the Nubian pyramids and the Kingdom of Kush, let's narrow down why the Kingdom of Kush is significant. There was a specific core area among the Kushites' territory that displayed their extravagance and showed how they rivaled the Egyptians. It was a place called Meroe. It was also one of the earliest areas built which functioned as a burial site, containing over 40 queens and kings, and was the most extensive Nubian pyramid site. They also developed the Meroic language. A lot of our knowledge based on their language is actually biased against that was written by the Egyptians, Romans, and Greeks. This is because we don't fully understand currently the Meroitic language, even though there are two forms, cursive and hieroglyphic. Scholars today are still trying to work and continue to decipher the Meroitic language. Much of it was destroyed and broken apart in this image toward the right. It's broken up into little parts of the stele. Moving on into the significance and the design of the Nubian periods, the main focus of today. These pyramids ranged in the height from 20 to 90 feet and were narrow, which created the distinctive steep slopes to these structures. As to a theory on how are these Nubian pyramids were built was the shaduf, a simple people-powered wooden crane. It was anchored in the middle of the plot as the pyramid was built up around it. They usually had a whole bunch of people holding on the ground while there's someone at the top of the crane anchoring down each and every mud brick. Unlike the Giza pyramids in Egypt, these pyramids have no burial chambers inside. The outer layers of this was mostly rubble and dirt. However, the first section was usually called the offering chapel. It is the entrance to the pyramid itself and where people give gifts to the royals. You usually find offerings of bows, horse harnesses, wooden boxes, pottery, and imported goods from far-reaching trade with Egypt, Rome, Greece, India, and China. This is not where the royal families were buried. Actually, they were buried in the underground tomb. There was actually a division between the tomb. First off, it was the first chamber called the antechamber. They had columns of hieroglyphs and brightly colored paintings of gods very similar to the Egyptians, such as Isis and Osiris. The second chamber would have similar decorations. Niches in the walls may have held sculptures. This is where the king or queen would be laid to rest on a wooden bed. However, modern archaeological digs have never been found. There have been no hints of mummification that we typically see in the Egyptian periods. Some speculate they have been stolen. There are leftover jars in this burial site. However, it could indicate that it was cremation instead of mummification. In difference to the Egyptian pyramids, the Great Pyramids are about 481 feet with much steeper slides, and most were built 2,000 years after those at Giza. To give a ratio on how grand these pyramids are compared to the Nubian pyramids, here is a diagram of how large these Egyptian pyramids are compared to the Nubian pyramids. Meroitic script was created describing the king or queen's life in the kingdom of Kush. However, in the Egypt side, kings and queens can control everything except death. In the low reliefs in the Nubian pyramids, they were carved larger than the gods, which means they felt like the kings and queens controlled everything, even to death. The Great Pyramids of the Egyptians had over 3 rooms, which is quite different than the Nubian pyramids. It did not include the myth of trap rooms like spikes or giant rolling balls. These pyramids had different separate burial chambers for the king and queen, which is within the pyramid, not underground. And they also had a giant lavish gallery included. They were quite elaborate compared to the Kushites, but smaller in number of pyramids. They are actually only about 116 Egyptian pyramids versus Nubian pyramids that count over 200 of them. So here's a comparison on the scale of Nubian pyramids today. You could see that they are much smaller than the Egyptian pyramids. Here's one of the Egyptian pyramids. even though they had many differential aspects, there are many similarities as well. Like ancient Egyptians, both would design and build their own pyramids in life while the royal families are alive, so there would be no delay in their journey to the afterlife. Construction could take over a year for larger pyramids, but they had a whole bunch of workers to help them. The Kushites and Egyptians had intermingled for thousands of years at this point and shared many gods involved with the afterlife. They do believe in gods to guide them in the afterlife. Overall, the Egyptian highly influenced Nubian culture. Nubian pyramids were built after the first pyramids of Egypt. Most were during the New Kingdom. But in the end, why are the Nubian pyramids always overshadowed, not as well known despite there are over 200 of them? There could be 3 reasons that I have narrowed down. First one is, it could have been purposely erased history. Almost all the Nubian pyramids have been plundered by tomb raiders looking for treasure, sadly causing significant damage to these sites. An Italian traveler, Giuseppe Ferlini, who blew out more than 40 tombs looking for valuables in the 1830s. At the time, no one thought it was a problem since a lot of colonialism happened throughout the thousands of years. Muradic stelae and hieroglyphs were destroyed in the process and were stolen by treasure hunters as well. As previously mentioned, the Muradic language has yet been fully deciphered, and a lot of the writings based on the Egyptians are quite biased and could be untrue. Many of the articles written by and scrolls written by the Egyptians were in a negative perspective of Kushite culture. The second reason possibly was the scale of the Great Pyramids. Perhaps it was the matter of quality over quantity. The Great Pyramids in Egypt were 5 times larger and were more lavish, like the King Tut's tombs. Lastly, it could have been the current Sudan's civil wars. There are many civil wars and economic conflict within the area, making tourism difficult to prosper. This imposed various Western nations to come to the country and visit them physically and see the wonderful nature of the Nubian pyramids. Despite all these comparisons to the worldwide Egyptians, it really makes you wonder what else was hidden within the Nubian pyramids. What else did the Egyptians hide from their writings about the Kushites, and why do they envy them so much? With these theories as to why the Nubian pyramids are not as popular, it could just possibly be that quality was favored over quantity, and that the Westerners love the giant scale of the Great Pyramids. Much of the history was erased for such an advanced civilization. I hope you learned a thing or two about the hidden ancient city in Sudan and the Nubian pyramids that lived thousands of years ago. Thank you for listening. Shout out to this website for the Nubian pyramid. It has an interactive function that you could actually look and explore and experience what it's like to actually see one, actually journey through one too. Since it's unfortunately that we cannot visit Sudan because of its ongoing wars and economic conflict.